What's going on, Workforce? Brian here.
Chris here.
And today we're talking about ability bloat. This is a topic that's come from suggestions within the community. Talking about Endwalker 6.0. New skills. Is that going to make your rotations harder? What are the options out there? But first, Chris, who's sponsoring today's post?
Guys, today's video is brought to you by Audible. Now, Audible, I am finishing up books 1 and 2 of the Theft of Swords series, and we'll be moving on to The Rise of Empire by Michael J. Sullivan, including books 3 and 4, narrated by the fantastic Tim Gerard Reynolds. And it's an absolute blast to listen to, and honestly makes me look forward to as the grass grows a little bit faster as we move into the summer months, so that I can spend more time mowing and listening to these books. Audible is an incredible platform with so much more than just books and so much to offer. If you have not tried it, your first 30 days are free on them. I encourage you to visit audible.com/worktogame or text worktogame to 500 to get started.
And thanks again to Audible for sponsoring today's post. Incredible, incredible. Guys, if you haven't signed up with Audible, use the top link in the description. I highly encourage it. They are a fantastic service, and I cannot recommend them highly enough. Thanks again for sponsoring today's post. But even before they were a sponsor, I've been a long-time user of Audible. So let's dive in, because this topic comes from the community. We've talked about it in certain degrees with every expansion. One of the things that I've advocated for, and I'm sure I think before you jump out of the video, everybody, just note that when I talk about the PvP combo system, I'm not talking about simplifying the PvE experience to be like the PvP experience, but we've already seen some of that brought in. That's an idea that I've kind of thought of, but I want to talk to you guys about it a little bit more in detail. Chris, are you concerned about ability bloat as a keyboard player? I know that ability bloat as a controller player is a concern. Especially because some jobs in the game right now are perfect on controller, and some jobs I just go, ooh, they're close, but it's still a little bit of a challenge.
You're always going to have a threshold of jobs. You don't want all your jobs having the same number of abilities for a number of reasons. So it's nice to have complexity and a variety, because that's what allows us all to find something that feels comfortable. Control scheme is not the first thing that comes to mind. The first thing to come to mind is how do you, A, make it feel good for veteran players, and B, make sure that it does not punish new players. And because eventually you cross your bloat threshold, and the way you fix that is you remove things like protect.
Yeah.
I am currently subscribed to World of Warcraft and Final Fantasy and playing Guild Wars, which doesn't require a subscription, but I have both expansions purchased. Looking forward to End of Dragons. And so I am currently a paying member of 3 different ecosystems that all tackle this differently.
Yes.
WoW recently changed that. They've moved to a borrowed power system instead of Final Fantasy XIV is ability bloat is plan A, and then Guild Wars has a totally different combat system that's baked into its very foundation. And so it's interesting in this context, but it's not something that WoW or 14 could be like, oh, let's just import a version of that. It won't fit. I mean, it's a square into a round hole. My concern is that every expansion is a little bit like, I want shiny new things. I want shiny new things. And after you keep just eating candy, you're like, why do I not feel good? And ability bloat is one of the things that does that. And in that way, there's going to be moments where you're like, wow, I think Stormblood was way better than Shadowbringers. And that's just a feeling you get when that system takes place.
So one of the things that I have a concern with, because we've seen it already, like we've already seen this happen before, is that the new player experience ends up becoming a little bit less, where the jobs feel so good that like that, man, like what a great experience at, oh my gosh, level 80, and then at 70, it feels good. Like, so as you kind of tier into the 50, the 60, the 70, the 80, and as soon with Endwalker to be the 90, like that's where their identity really starts to, that finished thought for the job itself comes into play. And then at the same time, when you look backwards, when you go back into old content, it ends up being a challenge, because it's like, okay, there's just not a lot going on. And we've seen that critique happen time and time again. And the general response is it gets better. And that's true. But I just think that it doesn't have to, like, games shouldn't have to get better so that everybody can have this great experience. You're asking somebody to kind of have this sense of tenacity or trust or just endurance to say, okay, yeah, you kind of went through like the boring part, but now here's the really great experience. And then you only feel that when you kind of step backwards. So there's kind of two ways in my mind that I think they can somewhat address this. There's actually probably three or four, like as I pontificate, it's like, okay, yeah, the ideas start flowing. But the first things first, I want to talk about the concept of the level syncing of the abilities, right? Like if as you level up, you can have those abilities and you can play that older content without having to sacrifice that, you don't end up having these weird tiered experiences. Here's the 50, here's the 60. The downside to that clearly would be the game isn't balanced around that. Nobody had a concept of a level 30 fight with all of these different abilities. So you're talking about, in this case, just this idea alone is a massive amount of work. Like this is like, hey guys, have you been working on this for 2.5 years? No? Well, maybe in 7.0 or something like that, where we would see that kind of system come back into play. That's one of the strengths of Guild Wars. Like you're talking about, you get your abilities, you have your abilities. You're not going into higher level, lower level content. You have your set. And so you're good no matter if you are being synced down by the zone. It's just saying, here's your kit and go nuts and have fun and try to master those abilities together. Beyond that itself, when we look at the PvP combo system allows you to take the combos of 1, 2, 3 and move them into pressing 1, 1, 1. And the downside could be inherent boringness to it. But then I say, you got to also factor in the off the global cooldowns. You also can factor in many other options that can bring in that flavor. It doesn't have to be, you only have 2 buttons and then you maybe have a third button. The idea is that when you look at Paladin, for example, Paladin on controller would be a great job that would have these skills somewhat evolve, like with Atonement. That ability alone could have just been just a whole combo that just exists off of an existing button. It doesn't have to be a 5th button floating out there.
There's probably a version where it at least shares a button with Confiteor. There's probably because you have a physical rotation and a magical rotation. And once you enter the magical rotation, you're always going to end with a Confiteor. And so having it end with Confiteor and then that button turns back into Atonement, which is the ender to your physical rotation, where you cast it 3 times rapidly. It's like, okay, we can store your Atonement charges and you can go Confiteor, Atonement, because it can sit up. And so like there's something nice about things like that. I think Gunbreaker is one that's primed for simplifying the number of buttons. And the
button breaker,
it shifts to, well, that's going to take away the complexity. It doesn't have to. Look at original Mario games. Look at some of these games where there weren't that many buttons on controllers. I still can't beat them. Like complexity and difficulty are different things. They're separated. And so that's a very simplistic way to look at how to add it, is to add more buttons. But a rotation 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 is not complex, but there's 7 buttons. 1, 2, 3, 1, 1, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 2, 3, 2, 3, 1. Right? Look at Guitar Hero. Guitar Hero doesn't have that many buttons. It gets real hard. And then having buttons be on repeat. Repeating things as a rotation means that no matter how complex it is, it gets really easy over time because you get used to doing that dance. Having rotations that have proc rates, things like Red Mage, where like it's not, it's a priority list, not a core rotation, and that like when something procs that changes what you do, actually makes a job more complex than just adding more buttons.
Well, and here's the concept behind it, because again, like when I think of that, how, and we've already seen the PvP combo system brought into PvE content when we're playing as guest characters, as a part of a certain segment in stuff. No spoilers here, but occasionally you might take on a mask of somebody, and you have that system. So instead of having like all these hotbars, they wanted to keep it pretty simple. So they do simplify when we've seen it in PvE so far. But what I think would be a benefit into that regards is that could then allow for more complexity to be brought in actually sooner to the player. The level 1, like hitting level 10, 15, 20, like all of a sudden you can bring in either off the global cooldowns, or you don't have to worry about sacrificing like, well, guys, we're going to have to cut that skill anyway at level 90. Like skills can evolve, which they already do. They made that change a couple of expansions ago, and you could see that clearly with the healers. Like when we talk about, and I'm going to focus on healers right now, you have, here's your dot, here's your basically the button that you spam for damage, here's your AoE, here's your class identity kind of ability or abilities.
Right.
And so it's like, it's very, like, from a damaging perspective, it's been very and hyper simplified to the point where it's like, how cool would it be for them to be able to say, okay, A X, A Y, to where all of a sudden you could bring some more complexity to the damage side of healers without having to sit here and say, well, what do we cut? Okay, well, we're going to have to cut this healing ability or this thing that's really cool. And you could end up sitting and restoring some of those buttons back and allowing for that level of I think it would actually and could add more complexity.
Right. And having less buttons lowers the skill floor because there's less tool tips to read.
Mm-hmm.
There's less things to understand to do at a foundational level.
Yeah.
But having complex rotations with things like proc rates, shifting priorities, the difference between macroable crafting and expert crafting where condition matters, when you can add complexity later, and that increases the skill ceiling, which increases the total growth curve of a job.
Mm-hmm.
Paladin is the prime example among the tanks. It is the easiest job to do at a foundational level. You could get by. You could never, ever do your magic rotation. You would clear all casual content in this game.
Yeah.
You would. You'll get through it. You're wasting, we've seen clips of people who have their mana capped on Dark Knight or Paladin and it just makes people's head hurt.
Yeah.
You get through the content. It's fine. But when you want to get better, there's this whole other system. There's this whole second portion of a Paladin rotation that when you add that in, wait, what's the common denominator of 25, 30, and 60? How much skill speed do I need to have where this actually all syncs up? Like, it gets much more complex when you start to try to master Paladin. And that's something that the game could use more of, not less.
Mm-hmm.
WoW has moved more to a borrowed power system. Every system is going to have pros and cons. The con of a borrowed power system is much like a borrowed book. You have to return it. And it doesn't feel good when you earn something that you enjoy and then you have to give it back. That's awful. And so it means you start every expansion feeling weak, you get strong, and then you give it back. And that doesn't feel good,
right?
Especially when it's something that's part of your identity. The Covenant system is adding 2 abilities to your bar. As you add 2 abilities to the bar, those will be taken away going into the next expansion. Mm-hmm. How they're avoiding bloat is you're never getting new skills. They're borrowed. And then you'll give those back. Okay, that doesn't feel good.
No.
But the upside of that is we never have to worry about bloat. You never have to worry about deleting protect to make room for something we haven't yet got, because you've got 2 slots for the borrowed slots this expansion. That next expansion could insert 2 different ones. From level 50 to 60, there are no new skills added to your bar. There are traits that improve your existing skills. What if every expansion we use those traits to modify the way your skills work? That's much closer to a Guild Wars system where you add these specializations that change your job by opting out of previous specializations into the new ones. You're adding build variety. And so each game has pros and cons. The button bloat is a serious concern because people's first thought is, how am I going to fit it on the bar? Mm-hmm. But long term, it's how are we going to get new players caught up? Because veteran players, the way we make it feel good is we delete stuff they're not using.
Right.
That's stuff that the old players are a player in old content is still using because they haven't gotten to the new stuff.
Right. They delete it and then maybe they add another version of it. Right. We lost Stone Skin, which was cool. I loved Stone Skin. Like even in 11, that's just the old 11 player in me. It's like always be Stone Skinning, because you could actually get a trait that you could put a little bit of Stone Skin on with Cure. Like it was such a cool thing in my mind. And sure, like maybe it's broken, maybe it's meta. I don't care. But at the end of the day, like they took it out, and then eventually the White Mage got a shield when they made all the healers pretty much the same. Like everybody can heal over time, everybody can shield. But I'm really excited to see with healers specifically how Sage helps to kind of balance out shielding and pure as those options in themselves. And I hope that we can start to see some more of that. I hope that the dev team is thinking about this without that sacrifice. Because when you talk about 90 or the potential, maybe 7.0 going to assumedly 99, I would think 99. You know, I think that's the
poetic,
perfect,
but it doesn't have to happen.
No,
the question is what happens with 8.0. If their plan is to go to 110, then you just let it go to 100.
Right, exactly.
If your plan is to go to 99 and hit reset each time, stop at 99. That's very Final Fantasy.
99 is a great Final Fantasy level. But anyway, guys, on the concept of ability bloat, let us know what you think. We talked about traits. We talked about the PvP combo system. We talked about the syncing system. The syncing system, I think, would be a massive overhaul. And we start to see them made those changes like in Boja, where that kind of takes you forward. But at the core of it, if you ended up having your kit and they could bring your kit in earlier, what would be the reward for hitting 90? Like, you want to have something that's satisfying about that. And maybe that's a trait. You know, like if you take kind of all of these little pieces and put them together, maybe those traits aren't sunk, but the skills themselves are. And those traits are actually what, I guess, make it feel exciting to hit those caps.
A choice more meaningful than materia would be nice.
Yeah.
Gearing is so flat in this game. Make your eye level higher is the typical. There's very little skill priority to choose from. You got a handful of materia slots. You could move all of our materia slots to our jobstone, and you could delete all gear. Gear could just be a flat eye level that you increase. There is nothing meaningful happening with gear. And now that we glamour it, and that's just the nature of it.
Man, that's a topic. Guys, stick to it. We might be talking about that this week.
It doesn't do anything.
Right.
You just replace it. I mean, you would have to, instead of just making eye level move up at a flat rate, you would have to say, okay, we have these 8 slots of eye level that, you need an A, B, C, or D, but there's nothing meaningful about it because we just glam it anyway.
It's true. All right, guys, spicy topic right there at the end of this post. Stick to the channel for more
content. I can't believe that's what you think spicy when I
think
dropped
it
the
is
phrase
spicy.
that Stormblood is way better than Shadowbringers.
Is that the hidden phrase?
That is the hidden phrase.
Stormblood actually is growing on me in terms of, I feel like, what has been...
He agrees with it.
I think what's been transpiring...
spice.
Oh, no. It's that, like... I think when you look at Shadowbringers, it came in, everybody was so excited, like it has this great story, but then over the course of it, Heavensward's still by far better than Shadowbringers and the pieces that Shadowbringers is filling in now are that. So as a standalone, it did really well, but I think if you talk to anybody, once that honeymoon phase is over, you start to look at the game, you're like, it's done a lot of really good stuff. But at the end of the day,
Heavensward is a very full-featured, complete thought.
Yeah. So anyway, more things to discuss here on the channel. Let us know what you guys are thinking. Before the game, my name is Brian.
My name's Chris.
Thanks so much for watching. Hopefully you have a fantastic day. We hope to see you in our next one. But until then,
take care.
Audible.
Insert audible.
Audible.
I wish they'd just let us do that. There's requirements.
Guys, have you heard about Audible? No, they're fantastic. It's like, hey, are you getting ready to travel back out into the world now that the world is slowly starting to come back to normal? Well, don't forget Audible. Sign up for Audible. Get your book on while you get back onto that commute.
All right.